We're going to talk about design, intuitiveness,
Yep.
and we have slides.
And we have visuals.
Yes, which is fun. Everybody loves visuals.
Yeah.
Before we get
I
started,
need pictures. Yeah.
I love pictures. I'm already looking at these pictures. Before we get started, though, let's talk about your role at the company and what Michael Graves Design does.
All right. So we are a design consultancy, and that does everything from architecture to product design to graphic design and branding. And my role, my background is in product design. And so I'm one of the principals and owners of the firm, and also one of the heads of design in what we do in the world of products, which is everything from housewares to healthcare to really we'll do anything.
Yeah, and you work with a bunch of different types of clients.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you were talking to me before about intuitiveness, different ways that people think of intuitive design. Maybe the way that is a little bit different.
Yeah. So what we found and what we work towards a lot now is that a lot of people talk about that it's got to be intuitive, or they say, here's my new thing, and what's great about it is it's intuitive.
Right.
And what we realize and what we try and educate people on is that intuitive is not necessarily the goal, it's an outcome. And this idea of think about what's intuitive. Intuitive means that you know how to do it without needing any instruction. And by that logic, nothing is intuitive in this world. You have to learn everything.
Yes.
So really, and so that's where this image kind of launches into is so let's talk about learning. And so this is actually an idea from the 1970s. Someone by the name of Noel Birch defined the 4 phases of learning. And they do not roll off the tongue. But the first is unconscious incompetence. There's something to be done. So, and the example is walking. So infants, babies, they don't know that walking's a thing. They don't know that they can do it. So they're unconscious about it and they can't do it. Phase 2 is conscious incompetence. Okay, now I realize that walking is a thing and I might want to do it, but I don't really know how to do it yet. So that's like toddling. You're trying, you're falling, you're failing. And then third is conscious competence. So you're still aware of it, but you have to think about it. You can do it now, but you really have to sort of focus. Like an older kid, they're still going to kind of trip up every now and then. And then the 4th and final phase is unconscious competence. You can do it, you don't need to think about it. It's like walking and chewing bubble gum. You can just
Yep, and that's a learned process.
It's a learned process, but then it's all right, but what does that mean? There are these 4 phases, and that's where we like to overlay this idea of the learning curve, right? We've all heard that, it's got a steep learning curve. Well, the learning curve's a real thing because learning isn't a linear process. So what we do is we show people let's overlay those 2 ideas. And now it gives it a little bit better context of how hard it is to learn something. And then we get into the idea of if you're going to develop a product, instead of talking about intuitive, let's talk about what kind of product you're going to do. Because if we're designing something that's truly intuitive, it's up at the top of that curve. People already know how to use it. So you're really just doing a refresh. You're not innovating. You're not disrupting. Disruption's all the way at the other end of this. Disruption is saying hey, you had no idea that this existed, but we're going to introduce a new thing.
Right.
And so the point is, don't design to be intuitive. Design a great user experience that is going to facilitate that people learn.
And they figure out how to use it.
The process of learning is going to sort of make them excited, make them latch onto your brand, your product. You're walking them through that.
Literally walking them. Pun intended. Yeah, that's interesting because I feel like a lot of intuitive, like you said, isn't redesigning it, isn't helping the user along the way. It's just iterating.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like battling it just as a buzzword today. We were talking about, so Casper, the mattress company, released a new light. And it looks like the Apple HomePod, so sort of issue number 1. But they talk about that it's an intuitive light, and to turn it on, you just turn it over. Who here would know that to turn on the light, you just flip an object over?
Yeah.
And to dim it, you just twist it. And it's I think it's fun. I think that's a cool user experience, but don't say it's intuitive.
We just learned it.
Right.
I didn't know what that was.
And then the folks who were up here before me were talking about products here. It's you tap it 3 times, and it's going to blink at you a few times, and it's that's not intuitive. And,
yeah, don't all products do that?
Right.
No, they don't.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really about focusing on your user experience and understanding where in those phases of learning you're diving in. And we work at all of those, all sort of ends of that spectrum.
Yeah.
So yeah, so one thing I like, a bike, right? Like a bike, there's the saying, it's like riding a bike. But in the 1880s when the bike was invented, that was a disruptive idea. All right, now
You couldn't have that saying back then.
Right. No, absolutely.
It's like what? It's like riding
a
what?
horse.
Yeah.
But
It's like riding a horse is great.
So the learning
But
curve
different.
is different, right? To learn how to ride a bike for somebody who's never used it, there's a lot of trial and error. But once you get there, it's like riding a bike.
Yep.
Because it hasn't changed in over 100 years. But it was disruptive. It allowed people to get around independently on their own without the need of a horse. And you don't have to feed a bike.
Or
But-
do you?
Or do you?
Smart home, I'm looking at you. I don't know.
But then but now where we are with all the smart products, technology, like what everybody always says, like Apple's so intuitive, right? But really what Apple was masterful at was designing a great user experience so that when you used it, you got up and running fast. But you need to, because technology today continues to advance, so it's not just, they don't say it's like using a Palm Pilot for a reason, right? We didn't do the Palm Pilot and be like, we're there,
Totally.
don't need to change it.
Yeah.
So you're constantly going through this learning curve.
That's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, it's the learning part of it.
Yep.
They're not building intuitiveness, they're building learning.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, what we're challenged with the smart home is you're getting into the user experience of the physical realm. And technology companies can get away with this, but can you imagine if you woke up in the morning and your house had updated itself, and now the light switches are on the other side of the door, and your dresser's in a different,
Yeah.
but that happens, right? Like you turn on Apple TV, you turn on Amazon Fire TV, and like the user interface is completely changed. Like, instead of scrolling down, we're gonna have you scroll over now.
Yeah. They have the luxury of that because it isn't the same type of
It's
situation.
non-physical, it's
Yeah.
purely digital
Yeah.
experience. But how we integrate that into our home, into our lives, you understand why people are saying like, well, I want it to be intuitive, because a lot of these devices, we've been using the same interfaces, buttons and switches and dials for decades. And now that you can use a phone to do it, and it's this sort of Wild West that we're all sort of challenged with and figuring out how we can make it work.
Yeah, it's separative. Like this is that iPhone that you spoke of earlier, in many ways.
Yep.
But it is this thing that, again, I've said this a lot, but this ecosystem is over here, and now my light's over here, and do they talk to each other? Neither the two shall meet. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's, and then when we think of intuitive, so a funny thing happened. So think about an ice cube tray, right? Like, ice cube trays have been around since the advent of the in-home freezer. And most everybody here has probably seen and operated an ice cube tray where you fill it with water. But I have small kids, and we were staying at another house, and the refrigerator, God forbid, didn't have an ice dispenser. And so I was filling the ice cube trays, and my kids were like, what is that?
What? Oh, man.
And it was this sort of mind-blowing moment of like, this is one of the most humble, intuitive objects that I know of, and my kids are looking at it like it's this foreign device they've never seen in their lives.
You're using your hands?
Right, because somebody at some point had a more transformational or disruptive idea of like, well, if we're making ice in the freezer, why not just make the freezer dispense it? So to them, that's the intuitive thing, is to walk up. So when they walked up to this freezer and there's no openings on it, and they're looking around like, I want a cold beverage, where can I?
And they're just sad, I won't get it.
Yeah. So it's, we're constantly challenging ourselves to redefine what is intuitive. And I think it's more effective if we're really upfront and honest in the beginning of like, hey, if we're going to be really disruptive, we have to understand the resources that are necessary, marketing,
Yep.
communicating, but then also just designing a great experience that when somebody has to set up this device, by the time they finish the setup, they're still as excited as they were when they got it, and they're not 20 minutes down the road of being like, I don't know what my SSID is on my router, like, well, I
Yeah.
don't know where this stuff is.
And they just put it away, and they don't
Right.
want to deal with it.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about fatigue, like smart home fatigue and all the different devices. That can happen as well.
Right.
So what are some examples of products you've worked with that that has been exciting and part of this process?
So we've worked on some, making sleep machines that are connected. So, and there's a lot of great benefits once you can, program it to fit your life better. And so that, and it's funny because it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like the more technology that comes into our lives, the more we need it to be automated because we just can't possibly manage all of these things all at once. So, that's still where a lot of the evolutionary pieces are to it. In just making it fit your lifestyle better, being able to cater it to that more, giving people a little bit more depth of usability, and we're working with a barbecue company right now on some products as well that are all connected, and you're trying to connect these two worlds of this digital realm that could be anything it wants so long as it fits into that rectangle with real tangible things.
Yep.
And how we as humans are now conditioned to look at it and like, what does a button do? What does a dial do? What are all those things communicating to me? And when you have, and it's fun because technology alleviates a lot of that. I still get a call from my mom twice a year on daylight savings time of like, how do I change the time on this clock? It's all right, so the second button, you press and hold it for 10 seconds, because that's intuitive.
Intuitive, totally.
Right. But, so that's, I think, the advantage that technology has is you can create a better user experience. You can create and relay more information, but at the same time, there's a lot of pitfalls. You can put in too much information. If you're not connected with your end customer and understand the language that they use, you can be overly technical and just alienate them, and then you lose them. You lose a customer. And in this still sort of wild west of the smart home, like I think that's the biggest value, is creating great experiences that make people excited for your next product and make people advocates of your brand, versus being like, oh, I tried that and it just, I had so many issues with it.
Yeah.
And those are the pitfalls. People are racing to try and get to the smart home, but you can't do it sacrificing the user experience.
Right. Do you see any products that you're talking with, like having issue with that idea of this new intuitive way of actually learning and instead of just going for it? Like do you think maybe some of them just want to do it the way they've been doing it and don't want to go back to this concept that makes more sense to me?
So what we're excited about is that, the products like what Casper's doing, we went through this phase, once the smartphone came out, everything was like getting poured into this screen and control that we're carrying in our pocket, but we're seeing it reverse and go back out so that you have more points of control at the object itself. So we're getting back into that world of the physical user experience. And enough time has not passed that people have forgotten what a button does or what a dial does or a switch. So it's trying to, like, people are trying to pack more features back into the device. So it's
into the things we're already using.
Right. And so technology is starting to go more invisible and disappear back into things, and puts the onus back on the designers of the physical products to say, all right, well, how are we going to leverage what people already know, what is intuitive, but then how are we going to introduce them to new features and functionality in a way that they're going to enjoy? We understand that they're not going to understand it right away, but that make the learning process delightful, which is a big part of at Michael Graves, like delight is a huge piece of what we try to do, so that when you're using the product, there's all these moments of like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I really like that. And it wasn't a feature that we were selling, it's just an add-on that it's like, you've got to think through those details when people get into that moment. Are they going to clear that hurdle with a smile on their face? Or are they going to like stumble and get frustrated?
Right.
And that's gonna be attached to your brand.
Yeah. And we don't want that.
You don't want that.
We don't want
you
that.
don't want stumbling.
Rob, thank you so much. I think we touched on all the points. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about when it comes to design? I love this new paradigm, this new idea of intuitive. Let's not overuse the word intuitive. Let's think about learning.
Right. And learning and user experience.
Yeah, it's great.